Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. This podcast is dedicated to the spirits who believe life is meant to be magical and fun. It contains advanced viewpoints for the multidimensional human beings of the 21st century and beyond. Here, we venture to share the very mysteries of self and reality. My purpose is to light your spark and reawaken you to the fascination and awe that is all around us. And my goal is to help you create your own reality, to unleash your potential and open unlimited possibilities that are there for you right now, and you're not even aware of it. Today's episode, we're going to talk about channeling. I'm so excited. This is going to be fun and interesting to discuss. I was enlightened to talk about channeling a little bit. I was going through my YouTube and I watched this video where some Pleiadians had said that the Earth had gone through a vibrational shift, like a reset. And I was wondering, are these things true? And how do we make these messages? We hear so many different things where people have channeled, and what does it mean? And a lot of times it seems ridiculous or funny or weird, but it's so commonplace. And if we really start to talk about channeling and the history of channeling, going all the way back, of course, to the Bible, and experiences of channeling in my life and yours, I'm sure that we could have some pretty interesting discussions. And I think this is going to be super fascinating to talk about in a podcast. So I'm sure that you've heard of different channelers. Of course, everybody has probably heard of Esther Hicks and Abraham. Esther Hicks, if you go on YouTube and you can watch Esther Hicks, it's truly incredible. I've seen Abraham in live once, and I could feel a presence, a power, something going on. A lot of people make fun of it. A lot of people think it's weird. But when you listen to Abraham, there's nothing shocking. And it could be, who knows? This could be Esther Hicks talking, or maybe it's not Abraham every time. And maybe, what if Abraham doesn't show up and she's at a conference? I'm sure she just rolls with it, right? A lot of what she's saying is so true in your heart that you respond. That you get a joy when you listen to Abraham talk. And I think that there's something going on. That's my intuition, and I might be wrong. I've always been very interested in channeling and have wondered, can I channel myself? My grandfather was a very spiritual man and claimed that he could talk to ghosts and see different presences around himself, and he could communicate like, hey, he just said something or did something. And it's deep family tradition in my family. And usually around weddings or funerals, people would get together and they would have these discussions with long dead past relatives, and people would communicate in that way. And I would hear about this, and sometimes it would be kept quiet as a secret. But I would hear stories about my great-grandmother, and she would look through a crystal ball. People would come and visit her, and she would talk about different presences that were there or speak to past relatives. So are we talking about ghosts? Are we talking about entities? What is Abraham? What do you think of when you think of that stuff? This stuff is super fascinating. Now, if you ever get a chance, you should read any of the books by Jane Roberts by Seth. The books are all, Seth Speaks is a good place to start, but there's so many books and so much material, and it's super fascinating. These are, if you consider them fiction, they're great fiction, because the writer's the husband, and they do talk about, they separate themselves, and in some of the books she's going through some sicknesses or knee problems, and you get a feeling of what's going on in their lives, and then she would completely change over. And the stuff that Seth says, some of it is so deep and powerful, talking about physics and multidimensional. It's very, very fascinating. And so I was researching Seth after I had written the books, after I had read the books. And Jane Roberts wrote a book called ESP Power, and we'll try to go over that a little bit in this podcast. She actually discusses how she first communicated with Seth. And if you go back and read the early texts and watch some of the earlier interviews about Abraham, Esther Hicks talks about her experience where she first talked with Abraham. And then there's so many other stories. There's a great book in 2018 by Mike Dooley, which is a discussion of from extraterrestrial intelligence that's channeled, and I just found it super fascinating. There's Jay-Z Knight and Ramtha, or Lee Carroll and Cryon. There's Bashar. Dolores Cannon was able to have people channel through her hypnotic subjects, not herself, and was able to speak to certain entities through more than one subject. which is pretty fascinating. She wrote a book about how Nostradamus had come through some of her hypnotic trances and spoke with her through multiple different subjects and spoke in the same way, and she documents it. There's a very good book, and I recommend you read that. There's Mike Dooley, as I was saying, Tracy Farquhar is channeling an entity, and it's very powerful. Now, the thing that's interesting, when you listen to somebody that's channeling, oftentimes we will just give them the automatic credibility just by saying that they're channeling. And you know that there's some of these out there that are probably not true. So let's look at the history of channeling. And this goes all the way back. I mean, we think some people, and my atheist brothers out there, and people that simply do not believe this. And I certainly think I'm open to that possibility. But I do believe the human mind is incredible. And there may be deep parts of our own subconscious, if it's not real, that are able to associate with these streams of consciousness. Perhaps they exist from the past. Perhaps there's an imprint in the source energy that we talk about when we talk about physics. There may be a scientific explanation for channeling that would make it more reasonable. And by using channeling, we may have a way of accessing source information. And by taking the source information, and we will talk about translating this information and what does it mean and how do we deal with it, or should we give it reputation? And the thing that we will always do is that Esther Hicks, for instance, when she's channeling Abraham says what it is. This is the truth. You take it as a truth. Abraham doesn't have to provide scientific information or studies. What Abraham says is, Abraham is infinite intelligence. And there are other people that are channeling that are doing the same thing. They're simply stating the truth as it is, as if they know the truth. And in some cases, you trust your instincts, as we do with anybody. When we hear somebody talk, our instincts say this person's lying or not. A lot of times that's the best clue. And so a lot of times when I'm listening to this, I'm listening to myself too. Because my own body is a filter for information, and I do tend to trust it more and more, and you get a better idea of it. In the last half of the 19th century, when spiritualism was rampant, thousands of what were called direct voice trance mediums flourished around the civilized world, especially in England and in the United States. So this has been going on for a very long time. The most famous such medium was Mrs. Leona Piper of Boston, who was convinced no less, a famous psychologist and philosopher, than William James, that she had paranormal powers. Like most direct voice mediums, Mrs. Piper would fall into a deep sleep during which her vocal cords would be taken over by spirits of the dead who spoke in voices markedly different from her own. Until a decade ago, which mediums were hard to find in the United States. Now, they're all over the map, especially in the West Coast. Skeptics have described them as mediocre ventriloquists who speak in funny voices, but you can see their lips move. I live in California, and if I'm driving down any particular street in certain parts of Orange County or in Los Angeles, there's going to be a business that says psychic right on the outside, tarot cards or whatever, and there are people that channel. I find this fascinating, and it's more widespread than just the books or famous people that we read about, that this is happening on a regular level, and I'd love to hear your stories. So the fashionable phrase now, from back then, is trance channeling. There are new mediums, of whom J. Zebra Knight was the first to achieve fame and fortune. I think J. Zebra Knight was the Ramtha, thanks to back when Shirley MacLaine discussed channeling, and that's kind of when it first started becoming popular in the mainstream. Some people just channel dead relatives or higher dimensional beings, and some were starting to channel higher entities who once lived on Earth, and sometimes thousands of years ago, who live on distant planets or in higher dimensional spaces. Most of these channelers may be charlatans. That's possible, and we have to confront that possibility that some of the people on YouTube or the people that we hear talking are not being realistic with us. There is, however, little doubt that occasionally certain people, often someone who has a child or suffered a severe head injury or something happens, they have the ability to go into trances during which alternate personalities seem to speak through their lips or to write by seizing their hand. Mrs. Piper was capable of having 3 spirits simultaneously control her. one speaking through her mouth, one writing with her left hand, and a third writing with her right hand. Invariably, such mediums profess to recall nothing that goes on while they're in a sleep and trance. Now, it's interesting when you read Seth Roberts. Sometimes she'll say, I was there, I could remember everything, and sometimes she won't. And it's not quite clear about Esther. It seems like sometimes she's there, sometimes she's not. But I haven't fully gotten that answer. I have maybe not listened or studied enough of Abraham. I think I have. I will listen to everything every single day from Abraham because Abraham makes me feel good and I follow my bliss. But many religions have Bibles said to have been channeled by higher intelligences. Just look at the world that we have today and the religions that are very popular. Joseph Smith claimed to be the channel through whom the angel Moroni gave the humanity the Book of Mormon. Muhammad claimed to be the instrument through whom Gabriel wrote the Quran. The Reverend Sun Myung Moon was divinely inspired to produce the Bible of his Unification Church. Mary Baker Eddy believed that every line in Science and Health was inspired by God. During the decades when spiritualism was at its peak, hundreds of dreary volumes were said to have been channeled by departed spirits. In recent decades, especially in the United States, a rapidly growing number of books profess to be dictated not by souls of the dead, but by higher intelligence. Examples include Seth books like we talked about, Ramtha by J.Z. Knight. One incredible book that is absolutely wise and powerful and is the Course in Miracles. And there is truly a course in it. It's so well written, and it was just by a woman who was a secretary who started writing this stuff. And that is said to have been dictated by none other than Jesus himself. So we may not have time to discuss Course in Miracles or some of these books and all of these books because I don't want to have another 3 or 4 hour podcast. Maybe we'll come and revisit some of these. And if anybody wants to, let me know and I'll look more into it and we can discuss it. Until 1955, the largest sacred work of a religious movement said to be written or channeled was Oahspe. And I had not heard of Oahspe until recently. And stuff like this fascinates me, especially as a book collector. And so I bought the Book of Oahspe. And boy, oh boy, this book is... I'm looking at it on my desk right now, and it's like it's got 1,000 pages, something like that. It's pretty crazy. The author of this strange tome is John Ballou Newborough, a New York City dentist, and he stoutly maintained that angels manipulated his fingers while he typed. The book was written in 1881, privately published in 1882, followed by a much altered edition in 1891. It's inspired a cult called Faithism. Members established Shalom, a colony in New Mexico, which issued a journal called The Faithist Messenger, an advertisement by Owl Press, which until 1992 sold an edition of Oahspe. Describes the book this way: a history of the higher and lower heavens and of the earth for the past 24,000 years. Also a brief history of the preceding 55,000 years. An explanation of all the world's religions, the cosmogony of the universe, the creation of the planets of man, new commandments applicable to the present day, the unseen worlds. Written in 1881, Oahspe's science is today being confirmed by space satellites, new archaeological discoveries, and many other sources. Now, I cannot confirm that. It's just like when you have anything like this that's so tremendously, there's no way I'm going to read this. And a lot of this reads as some of the bad writing of the Bible. The Bible is one of the best books ever and has some terrific passages. And then there's some very slow and incredibly boring ones. And some of it reads like that. Some of the earlier books of Genesis where they're going through family lineage and things like that. But I'm fascinated by this. That some person sat down and started typing stuff. He said he had no clue what was coming out of his hands. This really happened. Was it coming from some source? Was it coming from a playful spirit that was having fun? What's going on with this? I mean, those are questions that come to my mind. This revealed for the first time as we talked about, but the record of being the largest Bible by Oahspe was broken in 1955 by a book that is out of crazy town, or I don't know what to make it. I'm not giving you a negative judgment on it, as I try to be neutral with everything. But this is completely fascinating, is the Urantia book. The Urantia's book, Urantia is a name for earth. It's pronounced Urantia. And it's now like in its 11th printing. There's like translations in Spanish and Finn, in Dutch and Russian and Korean, German and Swedish. There's no author name on it. It supposedly was channeled. The contents of the 196 papers, I mean, this bad boy, I think it's 2,100 pages. It's like 4.3 pounds. And I got this book because I want all information. And it's like one of the most detailed science fiction novels and I'm a huge science fiction fan. I don't know if anybody's seen this. When I filter it through my heart, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it's true. It could be just from the divine imagination of this person that wrote it. And there's no way for us to know. There really isn't. But they said they were channeled through revelators. And they have names such as the divine counselor, the perfecter of wisdom, the mighty messenger, the chief of archangels, the brilliant evening star, Melchizedek, and one without a name and number. Now, it's interesting when we see Melchizedek mentioned, because I'll talk about that with Paul Selig here in a little bit. But the central, they're divided into four parts. There's the central and super universes, the local universe, the history of Urantia, and the life of teachings of Jesus. The story of how this came into existence and the curious role that's another story we can talk about. There's a book I recommend called Urantia, The Great Cult Mystery. It's a little negative towards it, but there's not a lot written about it. As I read about it, it slowly became popular, I think like in the 80s or something, because some of the members of Kansas, the rock band, kind of got into it. But just some channeler, some spirit could channel, if it was a spirit, or somebody using the fabrication of a channel, completely created religion and changed people's lives. And these things are insane. So it's interesting. And is this real or isn't it? How do you tell? I would love, if you channel somebody, I would love to interview you for this podcast. And if so, please email me. If the Spirit wants to communicate through this podcast, I would be happy to interview you with an open mind and an open heart. And you can email me at brian@advancedsuccessinstitute.com. But it's interesting, the little bit I've read, I'm one of those people that wants to read everything that's ever been written. That was one of my goals at one point, and I do know that that's not going to happen, but I'll try. I'll listen to it. If I can't read it, I'll find some way. Urantia is book on audiobook, and I've tried to listen to it at 3.5 times speeds, like just once, just to see what was going on. And it talks, it's pretty, at the center of the master universe, the entire creation, the universe of universes, is this enormous Isle of Paradise, the largest body in the entire master universe. And in the book, it has this elliptical shape, motionless, flat, completely outside our space and time. It's not made of matter, but of some substance called absolutum, which is neither dead nor alive, which exists nowhere else but this place. So the paradise is this dwelling place of the great I Am, the ultimate, eternal, infinite God. His triune nature of Father, Son, and Spirit is symbolized by the Urantian copyrighted trademark of 3 azure blue concentric circles on a white background. And so it talks about the universe of Havona and paradise, Havona being heaven. And like, I think that heaven is like some planetary dimension. And there's gravity bodies revolve 7 different super universes, and there's 100,000 local universes and 10 million inhabited planets. And so this stuff's super fascinating. And they call Earth, it's like it's number 606 of the planetary group called Satania. Satania contains 619 inhabited worlds and 200 more that are evolving, becoming inhabitable. And the headquarters of Satania is in a world called Jerusalem. So I laugh, and I'm not denigrating anybody that believes in that. That's awesome. Please, I want to talk to you about it. I'm interested in anything like this. But there's a part of me that, just like anybody out there that's listening to this podcast, there's that part of you that thinks it's funny. There's a part of you that doesn't believe it. There's a part of you that thinks that some of these people are charlatans. And then the question is this the case? In the Oahspe book, they try to answer that. They say that the transmission of Oahspe by automatic writing should not be a surprise. Spirit communion is normal, natural, and not as difficult as some people are led to believe. It actually occurs much more frequently than most people consciously realize, being typically permitted as vague imaginings, intuitive impressions, or even fortuitous premonitions. It is only labeled as evil by those who lack understanding, or by those who believe they can only maintain their misguided agenda by suppressing honest investigation and keeping us ignorant of the true state of affairs. Knowing their agenda won't stand up to logic and intelligent inquiry. They've learned that inducing fear can serve their interests. Fear and ignorance have long been established as interrelated in nature. It is a sobering realization for the duplicitous that most people, if allowed the unfettered freedom to think for themselves, will eventually arrive at a place closer to the truth. That is on page XIII of the Oahspe. That's in the prelude. So that's an interesting perspective that they bring up. And so we look at some of these examples. And so I'm reading the book by Jane Roberts, ESP Power. And she gives a discussion of how she first meets Seth. If you read the Seth books, Seth is one of the first people to kind of advocate and talk about the law of attraction in a certain way. And when you read about Abraham and her Esther Hicks and her husband first became interested in the idea of channeling from Seth Roberts. I believe they actually trained with Seth Roberts' group, and I believe that they met Seth. And that if you listen to the first book by Abraham, they mention Jane Roberts, and it's something that they learned through. So Jane Roberts meets Seth for the first time using a Ouija board. And I guess it was very complicated at first, as they would move their fingers to different things, and it would take a long time to spell these out. And of course, that's creepy. I've seen all the horror movies, and I've never believed in a Ouija board, so I thought that was funny. But as she started doing this, she became more and more connected to Seth. And then inevitably, it became too rudimentary and difficult to use the Ouija board, because she would have the full answer in her head, and she would be spelling it out. So at one point, she just shifted the Ouija board aside and started speaking as Seth. And in these cases, they spoke in a different manner. Now, if you listen to the early Abraham, there are books on tape where the husband is interviewing Abraham and asking certain questions. They're fantastic, and all of the books by Abraham should be read. They should be required reading. I think that if you want to raise your vibration in any way, the knowledge is perfect and wonderful. And so in one of the earlier books, she kind of speaks with an accent. It's kind of like an Irish accent. And there are people that have commented saying, what was going on? Why doesn't she still speak with this accent? And it's easy for us to come to grips with that. Perhaps that they got more and more comfortable, the spirit did, or that it was a different, I don't know. It's just an interesting aspect to talk about. In Esther Hicks' experience, what she did is she started just in the privacy of her home, started typing on a typewriter, and that's how she came into conversation with Abraham. It was a process of her typewriter is what she did. So I found that interesting. And so when you read that book, that one is pretty interesting. It's the How to Develop Your ESP Power by Jane Roberts. And it does go into some exercises that we can possibly discuss in some other podcasts about the idea of the way that the mind reads thoughts, and the subconscious mind. And one thing that we can all accept, no matter what you believe about it, is that it's possible. There's a deep part of our subconscious mind that already has all this knowledge, and it's just coming out of us from inside our own minds and our own personalities. We can't discount that fact. But even if that's the case, it's not the person or spirit saying it, it's what they are saying. And so there's Bashar. Bashar, I've only seen videos of. Bashar, claiming to be an entity from another planet, has some just great advice about prosperity and the way that, in talking about thinking. And there's the Dolores Cannon books, which she's having other people channel. Her QHHT technique, quantum healing technique, is very powerful in talking about people's past lives. And in many cases, she's had spirits channel. As I mentioned earlier, she talks to Nostradamus, who comes through in multiple different hypnotic settings through different clients to talk with her. I don't know what to make of that. Some of the Dolores Cannon stuff is fascinating because she literally talks to hundreds and hundreds of people about their afterlives, and it's all consistent. It's all consistent. All the information, none of it contradicted. So different people were saying, and she had tapes of this stuff. And it's one of that I first heard about Dolores Cannon through Aaron Doty, and the more I read about it, it's super fascinating stuff. And so it makes you wonder, can we channel? Is there a way for us to channel? Can we have access to an entity as powerful as Abraham? Because clearly Abraham's wisdom has helped Esther Hicks. She's a wonderful person. I'm sure she's very prosperous and happy. And clearly Abraham has guided Esther just as Abraham has guided a lot of us in the way that we think, in the way that we create our reality. So it's interesting when you look at what is that we're most interested in. I guess we're probably most interested in looking at channeling beings specifically for the sake of human awakening. Not necessarily spirits or ghosts, but in particular I'm interested with those higher dimensional or groups of spirits that are communicating on some level, and are they? Because the information that's coming out is valuable and interesting. One I highly recommend are the books written by Paul Selig, and he's channeling. Now, if you go online and look on YouTube at Paul Selig, you'll find it very interesting because it's when he speaks, he's listening. His eyes are kind of rolled to the side, like he's listening, and then he'll whisper what the message entity is saying, and then he'll look forward, and then he'll say what the entity said. So it's disconcerting to watch him. It's a lot easier to listen to or read the books because you don't hear everything twice, and everything that has a better flow to it. When you listen to him, it seems hard to get past that because it's these. He'll say it once in a whisper as he's listening, and then he'll say it again as he's saying it again. And he's even expressed a joking frustration that this is not him saying these things, and he doesn't take credit for it. And there's a part of him that he said, "Oh, woe is me that they've chosen to speak with me." But if you listen to these books, and they're done in almost like in a spiritual course of some kind, and each one will raise, all I can tell you is when you listen to these books and you access this information, something is going beyond the words, because you can feel your vibration raising. The idea is that we're all entering into a new age, a reality revolution, which, and it takes several books for him to finally say his name, and he says his name is Melchizedek. And it's interesting when you go read the Bible, Jesus was a member of this church of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was somebody that Jesus looked up to. And who is Melchizedek? I don't know. He's mentioned as a positive all throughout the Bible. It's either a movement or following. And he mentions Christ consciousness in this book, but in a different way, talking about in the consciousness of forgiveness and love and this raising to a higher vibration. So, for instance, let me just do this, and I thought I would do this as an experiment just with this podcast. The most recent book was the Book of Freedom, and all of these books, the book I Am the Word, they have some great concepts and information. The way that they teach, it's very good. So I'm going to randomly open this book. And that's what I'm to give you an example. I'm going to randomly open a book and see, because the entire book was written by this channeled entity. So I have not bookmarked this or anything. So I'm flipping through and I'm opening it to this page. And it says, what you are truly saying is that you have opportunities here and now to know yourself in the true way that we speak to, through your children, with your job, and with your entire community, who doesn't want to agree with you, and perhaps for good reason. The realization of the true self comes at the cost of the known, and the realization of the cost of the known renders past choices as released because you don't need them anymore. When you no longer need the approval of your community, you are in fact free of it. And because you no longer need the approval, you are no longer serving it out of fear or seeking to appear or be approved for being who you think you should be. The idealization of a future that has the things you don't like excluded may in fact be something that comes, but in most cases, you will discover that your relationship to those very things is what has been transformed. And because the relationship to them has changed, because in the higher octave in choice, you are not aligning to fear, you release those things by natural or mutual accord that no longer serve anyone. Now, I don't know. Did that hit a mark with somebody out there? Throughout the book, there just very good wisdoms about the way that you look at the world and how the power of love and the power of your vibration. And so I don't know what to make of it, but I do recommend those books. I do think that you'll get something out of them. And so I think what's happening is that people that channel well, channel basically like a stream of consciousness. And so that's why some method actors will struggle mightily or even die. And you look at Heath Ledger when he did the Joker, You look at what happened to Jim Carrey when he did the movie about the guy that was on Taxi that died of cancer. They become completely another person. And so the people that channel are willing to disidentify with themselves. They're able to release themselves. And so in a lot of ways, there is no difference between possession and channeling. And channeling maybe is a nicer way of saying that you're being possessed. And there are my Christian friends out there that will say these are evil demons that you're allowing, and that's bad. And that's what they say. And I would like your information about this. Sometimes I don't, that's something, anytime that you talk about this stuff, it could be just somebody, a spirit that's playing a joke. I don't know. But the ones that are good can be disidentifying themselves. And that's why method actors are good at it, but it can be dangerous. It may be bad for your life, but it's powerful for that acting. So, according to Teal Swan on YouTube, anything can be channeled. Technically anything. You can probably channel the book that's sitting on your desk or that rock. You can channel anything. A person is channeling we're talking about the sake of human awakening. And so let's think about that. If these entities are claiming to be from a higher dimension and they exist in some higher plane, this information would give us valuable perspectives. But really, if we were to talk to an ant, how would we talk to the ant? We would have to understand their language first. And so there's probably an informational language disconnect that's occurring from these spiritual entities. And that they coming from we're in a 12th dimensional, 11th dimensional world like we talk about, and if these are 12th, 11th dimension beings, maybe that's why it feels so good to listen to them. There's a need for me to understand this. So I don't know. It's something that I've run through my mind. Consciousness is being channeled. It's limited. It has to be limited by the consciousness of the channeler. And so the more clear the channel, the easier. And are they translating an extraterrestrial language? And so is the mind translating? Is there something being lost in the communication? According to Teal Swan, language falls apart at the 5th dimension. So finding a language from a higher dimension that doesn't speak may be a matching game, finding words that limit what they're trying to say, the feeling. So if the channeler has a certain fixed set of beliefs, it probably limits. And so you don't know how much is coming through. So the channeler has to be willing to have no fixed perspective. An expert at stretching your perspective. To be able to empty your mind enough to give so that you can give the clear message that you're receiving. And you have to accept the fact that these beings are not always right. They have an identity, a consciousness, and a perspective. And it may not be objective. They may have motives. These beings are in the process of expanding their own consciousness as well. But I do think it is valuable to get their perspective or the people communicating that perspective, because there are spiritual truths that are powerful that occur to it. But I do believe it's just like us talking to a kindergartner, or even worse, we can't talk to an, maybe we could talk to a kindergartner, but we have to change the way we speak. So 11th dimensional consciousness, imagine we're in the 3rd dimension. What does that mean? How could you convey that? I mean, there's no death, there's time or space, pain is a delusion. And so I have become truly fascinated by this. And I have attempted multiple times through my typewriter to channel. And I've done it, and I honestly do not think that I was channeling. And from my own perspective, I've done it several times. I've been a blank. I've said stuff that clearly was affected by stuff I had read or talked about. And so in my heart, I had not felt like it. I did go out and you said, what if I wanted to channel? Is there a way to learn channeling? So there's a book by Sanaya Roman and Dwayne Packer called Opening to Channel. I do recommend, and I'm trying some of the exercises in it, and they kind of give an introduction to channeling and how to channel through trance, and that they explain there's high-level guides or entities that are less involved, and then there's personal guides and how they transmit messages, how you receive them, and they have some exercises that are pretty interesting of focusing and concentration, life force energies, and pretty interesting. And if you think about it, we're seeing channeling. One place that we're seeing it, a really good book that you read. Somebody has channeled that character into existence from somewhere. Some books have such good character that they become a living thing. So we're seeing channeling all the time. It may be a deep part of our subconscious, but there is wisdom in it. And I will start doing some channeling experiments if I reach a point where I could look at this and say that it is good or powerful. Let me see if I can read what I pulled it up here. And so I'll read it to you, and you can kind of tell that it was just, one time, I wouldn't even want to read it. I just don't believe that it's true. And so I have to reach a point where I believe that it's true. And as a spiritual investigator, somebody yearning for the truth, I will continue to do this. I've seen people that are very credible start speaking in tongues before, and I've had moments where I've had dreams where I've spoken what I felt like I was spoken to entities. That's really the closest that I've gotten. I've had numerous times in meditation and trance where I felt like I was speaking to my higher self. And I've had multiple discussions, not like I'm sitting in this room, but where I was literally outside of my body in another place, where I've spoken with versions of myself from the future and past and higher versions of myself. I've had discussions like that, and they felt real to me. And I don't know if I was channeling or not, but I would just really, really love to get your perspective on this. And if there is anybody out there that's channeling, I would love to talk to you or the entity that you're channeling. So please email me at brian@advancedsuccessinstitute.com and check out the Facebook group at Reality Revolution. You can also check out all the podcasts on therealityrevolution.com. If you need coaching, please go to my website at advancedsuccessinstitute.com. You can contact me on any one of those websites. There's multiple places to do it, and I would love to talk to you more about this. And let's learn. I'll try to make future podcasts where I'll do some channeling experiments, and we'll see what we get by channeling some entities in deep levels of trance. And I would love to hear what your perspective on it is. And so drop me a line. But thank you for spending the time with me. Hopefully you've enjoyed some of the previous meditations that I've created, and just would love to speak with you. I'm so grateful that you guys have spent this time with me. I'm such a lucky person to have you as an audience. And as this podcast grows, please subscribe to it. Please check out the YouTube channel slowly and carefully. I'm putting up videos for all of our podcasts. And I love you all. Thank you so much for listening today. And thank you for joining the Reality Revolution.